Today, in the media conference with Lal Goel, which is brought to you by V4 News, Global TV, V4 Stream, Malnadu TV, News Gaon Se, Samvad Sarokar News, Organ Donation India Foundation and Gyan. Our endeavor is to enlighten you with a new topic and current topic. But today our program is a very unique because we are launching for the first time on media conference with Lal Goel a very interesting book. But before I will go on the topic, I would like to inform you that today the world is celebrating World Day of War Orphans. World Day of War Orphans is celebrated on 6th January every year. The day enables the global communities to recognize the plight of a particularly vulnerable group. The day aims to address the war orphans as it has become a growing worldwide humanitarian and social crisis. The day ensures to voice out the predicament of war orphans. It highlights that children growing up in orphanage experience emotional, social, and physical handicaps. The World Day of War Orphans was initiated by the French organization SOS Enfants and Détresse. UNICEF estimates that there are nearly 9 lakhs children in the Northeast, all of whom have been seriously affected by the war, either through a lack of education, food, shelter, or a direct injury. In the developed countries, orphans are relatively less in numbers, but in countries that have been and are subjected to war and great epidemics such as AIDS, there are significant numbers of orphans. An estimate said that World War II created millions of orphans in Europe, with 3 lakhs orphans in Poland and 2 lakhs in Yugoslavia alone. The children are most often neglected. The day aims to remember these children and reminds the responsibility to work hard to diminish the shadow of war so that no one would be an orphan within the motherland. Now coming to our main topic, that is the launch of a very, very interesting book. The name of the book is Smalltown Nostalgia. You know, you have read a good book when you turn the last page and feel a little as if you have lost a friend. We lose ourselves in books. We find ourselves there too. I do believe something very magical can happen when you read a good book. Now, I would like to introduce and welcome our chief guest of the day, and that is the author of Smalltown Nostalgia, and he is Wing Commander Arjit Ghosh. Welcome, Wing Commander Arjit Ghosh on our show. Wing Commander Arjit Ghosh is a former wing commander who served in the Indian Air Force for 24 years and commanded 4 IEF units. He was chief operating officer at one of India's top international boarding schools on the outskirts of Bengaluru for 9 years post-retirement from the IEF. A former Ranji Trophy cricketer, Level B cricket coach from the National Cricket Academy, and a BCCI match referee for domestic matches. He has played, coached, and administered cricket and other sports at the national level. He was secretary of the IEF Sports Board for 4 years. He has also served as chief of mission of armed forces contingents to military world championships overseas and was the Asian representative on the international jury of appeal at such championships. A freelance sports columnist, he has been writing on cricket and educational matters for one of India's top magazines. His formative years in a scheduled small town and subsequent Air Force posting to remote corners of India have given him an opportunity to observe life firsthand in those far-flung areas and absorb the local culture and legends, all of which is vividly reflected in his writing. He is passionate about nature, sports, and people. This is his first book. Welcome, Wing Commander Arjit Ghosh on our show. As I have already explained to our viewers that this is your first book which you have written under the title of Smalltown Nostalgia, and Media Conference with Lal Goel is very fortunate to launch the book today online for the first time. So now my first question to you is, what does the title mean?
Good morning, Lal Saab. It's a pleasure to be back on your show once again. And of course, it's a different topic today. We've so far always talked about cricket. Today also we'll be talking about cricket because cricket is something which is never very far away from my thoughts and my heart. So we would be talking about cricket, but the main topic under discussion is this book called Smalltown Nostalgia, which I have actually been writing for quite some time now, and it's just that I was able to put it together in the last few months, and uh, it's just been published on Kindle now. So basically, as you asked about the title, why I chose this particular name was that I grew up in a small town. I've lived a lot of my life in a small town, of my early life in a small town, and it shaped my thinking, my personality, everything. Uh, and having once I moved out of that small town into the world, so to say, when I joined the Air Force, and it helped me to it always remained with me, the town, that small town where I grew up, the memories, the images, the friends, everything about that place, that remained, it was a part of me. And I so today, when I have time to think about that, I have when I look back at that time of my life, I look back with a very fond sense of nostalgia on those days, and I like to believe that all of us, or every one of us, have that nostalgia for the place where they grew up initially, their formative years, their parents, their childhood friends. We all have that nostalgia. So I thought that this would be a great name for the book, because it talks about a small town, because it talks about nostalgia for that small town and the growing up years. So that's why I called it Small Town
Okay,
Nostalgia.
okay. I'm sure many of our viewers, including me also, we also came from the small town, and we have that vivid memories of that small town. And surely this name of the book really is very appropriate because we all have the small town nostalgia ourselves. Now, you are in the Air Force, and with Air Force background, what made you turn to writing, Wing Commander?
Uh, Again, it's something which started very early. In fact, writing was something which I started when I was at school. I started writing small pieces. I started writing a small diary of my own. And it was basically inspired by my dad, who was a university professor in that small town where we grew up. And I would like to say, he is an inspiration behind this book. And he sort of inspired everything that I went on to become later on in life, including this hobby of writing. So, writing has been a hobby right from my childhood days. And although I moved into the Air Force later on, and I played cricket, and cricket, as I said, is an integral part of my life, has always been an integral part of my life. But I've never gone away from this, hobby of writing, reading books. Even when I was playing cricket, I always had a book in my cricket bag when I was traveling with a cricket team. I read that about Rahul Dravid somewhere. He said that, whenever he was traveling or something, he always had a book in his kit bag. And especially in the earlier days, teams would be traveling by train most of the time. So Rahul Dravid says that when he was traveling, he would get onto an upper berth in the train and take out his book from his kit bag and read it. So that was actually me as well. I used to do that as well. So that's where, that's how I turned to writing right from the beginning, right from my childhood days. And a lot of these pieces which find a place in this book now were actually written a very long time ago. And they started during that initial phase of writing, which I mentioned, of my childhood days and growing up times. So that is why it would sometimes appear as if, how can I remember something which took place so long ago? But the fact is that when I actually wrote that, it was that time. It was that time so many years ago when I actually first wrote it. That is why the memory, that image is still so vivid. So that's the reason why I've always written small pieces all my life. I've always, whenever something that I've been thinking of, something that has been bothering me or whatever, I would just write it down in a diary or in a small notebook or something like that. And this book is actually a collection of those small pieces that I wrote over the years.
So, but how much time it took? Means you have started writing from which year, almost how many years back, and now you have completed in this year, last year rather, 2020. So basically, it was done during the COVID time, or it was, you are, as you are mentioning, that you are writing in the diary now and then you have compiled everything and got it published.
It was actually a mix of both. You see, as I mentioned, I have been writing for a long time. So some of these pieces were written a very long time ago, as I said, and they were just a part of my old diaries, which I've carried with me across the years, so to say. And a lot of it was just locked away in those diaries, and a lot of it was locked away in my mind. Uh, because as you all know, when we work, we are so busy, we don't have time for these kind of things at all. You're busy working from Monday to Friday, Saturday, you're sometimes working on Sundays as well. So there's no time to actually sit back and think and write and take time off and think about things, try to put them down on paper. There's no time for that kind of thing. But as I mentioned, I kept on jotting down a few thoughts here and there, a few memories in my old diaries, and some of them have stayed with me, as I said, over the years. And when the lockdown happened, it suddenly gave me a lot of time on my hands. I suddenly had a lot of time on my hands. And that was a time when I thought that this is a golden opportunity to sit down with all those pieces that I've written in earlier years, and also to think about the various memories that I have and try to put them down on paper and to compile everything in a book. And I was fortunate because I had started actually writing a blog on the internet in 2010, which was also called Smalltown Nostalgia. And some of these pieces were actually on that blog when I initially started writing it. And this was when I was still in the Air Force. I was still traveling from place to place and on postings and all of that. So that blog grew from initially maybe 5 articles to 10 articles to 15 articles over a period of 4 or 5 years. And then because of that, being busy, as I said, I sort of lost track. And in between, of course, I tried to get it published, to be very honest, and somehow was not able to do it at that point of time. So I actually stopped writing the blog at that time and then just left it like that. And when the lockdown happened, so I had all this material at my disposal. I had the blog, I had the diaries, I had my memories. So I just sat down with all of that and started putting it all together slowly and writing new articles. Obviously, if it was to be made into a book, you couldn't just do it with 15 articles. So I started adding more articles to it. I started writing new pieces. And today that book is 45 articles long. And
So,
I would say it happened mainly during the COVID, during the COVID lockdown.
so basically, you have taken the advantage of the opportunity provided by the COVID. And see, our viewers, many of them are in habit of writing diaries. I am sure many of them are also writing the blogs. But this is something unique that you have clubbed the blogs, diaries, and with the new articles, you have published a book And so it is a very good thing. I am sure it's a very inspirational to many of our viewers who have written their diaries, and those diaries become useless after some time once the person is no more. But if they will publish a book like you have done, then it will always be in the record. So it is beneficial for everyone. Very nice, Wing Commander. I must say that this is something which is a unique thing. Now, you have mentioned about the sections or the chapters, different chapters. Can you just tell us about each section or some chapters? What are these chapter means from the beginning to the end? What these chapters means? Why you have called them as the different chapters? After all, it's your own small town experiences. So you have done it with the different towns or time period, different time period. You have put it the chapter or this chapter which are in the book.
Actually, what has happened, as I said, is that I started writing this initially about the small town where I grew up and the memories associated with it. So the first section, there are seven sections in the book. The first section deals with the memories of the small town, basically. So that section is called in a small town, long time ago. So that's the start of the book. That's the start of whatever I wrote in my blog, in my diaries, whatever it was. And that particular section has 7 articles, which talks about that time, that period, that small town, the memories of that time. The entire book, actually, that the thought process is the same. The nostalgia for something which has happened a long time ago, and which you remember now. But the first section is particularly about that small town, about the place where we grew up in. And thereafter, the second section is called moving out into the world. This is where I talk about my experiences when I moved into the Air Force and joined the Air Force, and started moving across different places in India on postings, on temporary duties, and that. And then there's a section, the third section is called Conversations with Dad. Now, as I mentioned, my father was the inspiration for this book, basically. He inspired me to write. He inspired me to, do almost everything that I've done in my life. And I learned almost everything, from him, whether it is, whatever. I mean, the way I live my life, everything was learned from him. So there were a lot of times when he and I would just sit together, and he was quite old by then. He had retired he was a university professor, as I mentioned. He had retired from his appointment, and we had actually moved out of our small town where we grew up into Calcutta, where we presently live. And so we would just sit together, and sometimes maybe at the breakfast table or at the dinner table, and we would have these long conversations about what he remembered from his old days, basically. Now, those days could range from anywhere from, he was born in 1922, so those days could range from anywhere from the Second World War to the 50s, to the 60s, and all of that. So those were times which I had not seen personally. Those were his memories. But I thought they were very relevant because they talked about a time from where my own memories began. So it was like a time prior to my own recollections. So I included that as a section. There are 5 articles, separate articles, on the conversations that I had with Dad, and which are basically, as I said, recollections of what he had seen during that time. So that's the third section. The fourth section is about there's no getting away from it. It's about playing cricket in a small town. Now, cricket as we know it today, and the cricket that we played then in a small town, were 2 completely different things. Today's cricket is so professional, so well organized, so highly paid, so I would say professional in every sense. You have people telling you how to train, what to eat, when to reach the ground. somebody managing your transportation, this and that. None of that was there when we were growing up in small towns and when we started playing cricket. So it was all our own interest and platforms which were created for us by people like my father, who was very closely associated with sports in that small town where we grew up. So that is a separate section in itself, because I feel that from there the passion for cricket in India that has developed from those small towns, from the cricket that was played in those small towns in those times. And that cricket, there was no money in those days. There was no money to even buy a cricket ball to play a match. You didn't have money to fund purchase of cricket equipment, pads, bats, things like that. But we still managed to play. We still had club teams. We had still had tournaments. We still traveled to different cities, and that was mainly because of the passion that a handful of people in those small towns had in those days. And they were, as I mentioned, this book is about a different time. It's about a different set of people altogether, and different set of mindsets. People did things in those days because they wanted to do them, because they enjoyed doing them, not necessarily because they were being paid to do it. So even though there was no money, even though there was no funding, there was this passion which people had. There was this, what should I say, the love for doing what they wanted to do, which enabled them to create opportunities for youngsters like us in those days, coming through, trying to play cricket and learning how to play and all of that. So this particular section about cricket in a small town is something which, where I talk about those things. And I'm sure that this is the same. I mean, this book which I've written, I feel that a lot of it is universal. It is not just restricted to me or my memories or the small town where I grew up. It is about that time, about the people of that time, and they would be the same everywhere in the world, because I have a lot of friends in different countries. I actually was lucky enough to be able to travel to a lot of countries subsequently. Now, what I realized was that the basic human emotions, the basic human concerns, they are the same all over the world. You might live in one corner of the world, you might live in another continent, you might live in a different country, but then the basic human things which concern you as a human being, they are the same for everyone. So that is what is the basic aim of this book, to talk about those emotions so that universally people can relate it to their own experiences in their own part of the world, in their own cities and towns where they grew up. So that's about the part four, where I talk about cricket in a small town. And then there's a part, as I said, as you mentioned, I'm very passionate about about nature as well, about traveling, trekking, going to hill stations, going to forests, and all of that. Photographing. So there's a section about that, about travels in nature. So there are 7-8 articles on basically on my travels, on treks, and what I saw, about descriptions of nature and that kind of thing. So that's a section by itself. And then there's a section where I actually, it's a very, very emotional section which I've titled Bidding Adieu, which was basically where I talk about saying farewell to my parents. And as I said, they were the pillars on which my life has been constructed. So it was very painful for me to write that section. But I thought that again, all of us would have gone through, many of us, most of us would have gone through those experiences, experienced those emotions. So I thought that if I could put it down in writing, maybe a lot of people would be able to relate to their own experiences when they pass through those, very, very terrible, very traumatic situations. So there's a section on that as well, bidding adieu to my parents. And then there's after that, of course, the last section is saying that life goes on. Obviously, once your parents are gone, life changes. Life becomes very different from the time when your parents were there and when they're not there suddenly. So that section talks about different things which happened after they passed on, and life went on. So that was it. And then there's an epilogue where I just sort of wrap up the book. So that's how the book is structured. and
Okay.
would be you can say that it's just a sort of a overview of what has happened in my own life
Uh,
till now, about the
okay.
things that I've seen.
Okay. So basically, the book, I'm sure this book, what you have described about the chapters wise, this is happening with almost everyone. How everyone has experienced the same things which you have mentioned. But now my question to you is, then what is the book is like a autobiography, or is that book, because one chapter where you have mentioned that you have taken the memories of your father, whatsoever his experiences, earlier experiences when you were not there, even of the Second World War, or even I'm sure the independence movement, etc. Otherwise, it is basically your own memories, you whatsoever written. So, is it is not termed as an autobiography of Wing Commander Ajit Ghosh?
I wouldn't really say that. It's not an autobiography in the sense that it is a reflection of the time, of the people, of the places that we grew up in. So, in that sense, it's not exactly just about me, as I mentioned. It's about everyone who has gone through those kind of memories, and all of us have these recollections of our childhood, of our parents, of our places where we grew up. So in that sense, it is a reflection, a portrayal of the time which is now actually changed. The world has become very different from what I am writing about in this book. The time when we grew up in the 70s and 80s, the world was very, very different at that time. So I thought that I should try and capture that, the essence of that time, the memories of that time, for the present generation who have not seen those times at all, and it would probably be a little difficult for them to even imagine such things. You know, in a small town, after dark, many times we would have extended power cuts. There would be no power at all. So we would be, in the evenings, we would be studying by lanterns, lantern lights, and, there would be no fans, forget about ACs. And we never really experienced any hardship because of that. We were used to that because that is how that time was at that point of time. So you adjusted, and you never really felt that you were missing out on anything. But if you say that to the present generation, who are used to 24/7 electricity and air conditioners and mobiles and internet, there was no internet. Can you imagine a life without internet now today?
Wing commander at that time, in our time, I am talking of late 50s or early 60s, there was no even telephones.
Absolutely.
Forget about the internet or the mobile phones. There were no, very few people used to have the mobile for telephone connection. So, and the youth, today's youth, especially what you have mentioned is very right, that today's youth are not aware. They feel that what they are doing, the older generation has also came across like that. No, they have not, as you have mentioned.
Exactly.
Now, my
Exactly.
question to you is, you have experienced both the things from the small town, because now once you joined the Indian Air Force, you have been posted in a big cities also. And so, how different the experience been from the small town to a big city, which you might have experienced?
See, the biggest difference between a small town and living in a small town and living in a city is the kind of warmth that you come across from people. In a small town, in that small town where I grew up, if I talk about that place again, almost everyone knew everyone else. So it was a small place in the 70s. It was. I'll read out a
Uh,
chapter on that subsequent.
can you just tell the name of because we are very, at least I am curious, I'm sure my viewers are also very curious to know which small town you are referring.
See, we came from Eastern India basically, and I grew up in Bihar. So this place where we grew up is called Bhagalpur.
Okay.
It's a small town in Bihar. It was a small town in Bihar. It no longer is a small town. It's very crowded, very thickly populated now. But in our time, it was a nice open green place with lots of playgrounds, lots of open spaces. uncrowded roads, and it was beautiful. It was a beautiful place to grow up in, and that's the reason why we have such fond memories of that place. And that's another thing, that's what I was saying, that in such places, the kind of warmth that you come across from people, almost everyone knows everyone else. Everyone will know you as a person. They'll know your father, they'll know your mother, they'll know your brothers, and you are sometimes called so and so's son, so and so's brother, and that kind of thing. So your own identity sometimes get lost in that. And uh, I had a very in that small town, my father was very well known, so almost everyone knew him, knew me as his son. And then my elder brother was a cricketer who had made a name for himself, very good, in fact. So again, everyone knew me as his younger brother. So that's how it was, and that's what made such places so close knit and so intimate. So wherever you went, people knew you, and it was not just that only if I know you, then I'll take care of you. Like when we were growing up as children, we had a big band of friends, so we would go and play in somebody else's house or whatever it is. But the great thing about that time was that their parents in that house would look after all of us as if we were their children. And if anything was going wrong anywhere, they would keep an eye out to see that we were safe, we were not getting into trouble, we were not getting into mischief. I doubt whether any parent today has that kind of time to see and look out for the children who are playing in their backyard. Or I mean, now obviously nowadays most of us live in flats, so maybe in front of their flat or whatever it is. So that to me is the biggest difference between living in a small town and living in a city. In a city, you often don't even know who your next door neighbor is in your building, in your apartment. Whereas there, as I mentioned, the entire town knew you. So wherever you went, people recognized, and to the extent was, I mean, during those days, there were not many cars. As you mentioned, there were no telephones. There were very few people had cars in those days. So the main mode of transportation in a small town was by bicycle. And so everyone knew you by sight, and they knew your cycle as well, the color of your cycle, and they knew that you would come on a blue cycle or something like that. And so it was that kind of intimacy, that kind of warmth, that kind of for example, if you were coming from the railway station from somewhere, we my grandparents were in Calcutta, so when we visited them when we were coming back from Calcutta to Bhagalpur, there were these rickshaws, cycle rickshaws, which were outside the station when we came out. Now, many times it so happened that we did not need to tell the rickshawala where we wanted to go. They knew us by sight. They just took us there. They just took us home. So I'm sure none of this will happen in a city. So having lived in a city for the last 30, 40 years of my life, I still miss that. I miss it so much. And I would, gladly sort of go back to that place if it is possible, and live there once again.
But nowadays, you will not find that small town, first of all. Secondly, because of the advancement of this technology, I don't think now that even the small towns will have, they might be having, those who doesn't have these types of exposures might be having the warmth, but the city like you have called about Bhagalpur, they will not have that much now smallness that everybody knows each other.
No, absolutely not.
Now you have mentioned about the time frame, because you have started from the beginning, say 60s and 70s and 80s, and now we are in 20th or 21st century. So you found difference in the people also. Earlier, okay, it was a small town, so everybody was knowing each other. But here also, even if you are staying in a big city, at least few people knows you. But whether their approach towards you and those people who were knowing you earlier in the small towns approach, you found any difference, or is it the same warmth with them also?
I personally feel that the people of that earlier time were completely different, because what has happened is we've all become very professional nowadays. Everything is driven by money. So whatever you do, whether it is teaching, coaching, playing, whatever, I mean, you do it because you're being paid to do it. Now, in the time that I am talking about, of the 70s and 80s, there was no money which was being paid. And if there was any money which was being paid, it was so little that it wasn't really the reason for you to be particularly doing that thing. So, as I mentioned earlier, the reason why people did things in those days was because it was a passion for them. And if I give an example of my own father, he was a university professor, as I mentioned, and he would have taught generations of students at home, after classes in the university, college, wherever he was teaching. There was there were students who used to come home to us every day, every single day, including Sundays, in the evenings, in the afternoons, in the nights, and he would have taught generations of them. And actually, if I may say so, he probably taught the entire town, actually speaking. And but if you were to see the number of students whom he actually charged for teaching separately, giving them private lessons at home, you could have probably counted that number on one hand. So you are teaching for 30, 35 years, you would have taught nothing less than maybe 10,000, 20,000 students. And the number of students that you charged for teaching separately would not have been more than maybe, not even maybe 100 students out of that. So that is the difference between that time and now. People did things then because they enjoyed doing it. He taught because he enjoyed teaching. He was not teaching because he wanted to be paid for that. He had his job in the university. He was getting paid with that for that, and he was happy with it. He didn't want to make extra money uh, out of taking private lessons. And so teaching was like a calling to him. It was like something which came from the heart. It's something which he wanted to do. It was not a profession. It was not exactly that he only taught because he was being paid for it. So that was the same everywhere. And if you see, because of that, what has happened, I mean, if I talk about those students whom I personally saw growing up, who used to come to our home, they became like extended members of our own family. And it remained throughout the time that he was alive. He lived to be 93 years of age when he finally passed away. And those students of his whom he had taught maybe 50 years ago, they would still come to see him whenever they were in that town. We had moved to Calcutta later on. So whenever they came to Calcutta, they would make it a point to come and look him up, to sit with him, to talk with him. And the warmth that they shared, the student and my father, it was amazing, because uh, the student sort of looked up to him as a mentor, as a guide, as a father figure, everything. He was not just a teacher who was teaching extra lessons to them. So that has changed. That attitude, that kind of feeling amongst the students and the teachers, not just in the academic world. It could be in sports, it could be in anything. You talk about the cricket coaches and all of that. Everything was, at that time, they just wanted to nurture you, to build you up, to make you the best that they could make you. If I talk about my own,
That is what I am coming to you, that you are also a coach and you have taught, you have coached our many of the Ranji cricketers and even those who have played in the Indian team also. So that warmth which you are talking about, time of your father's time, you have found that warmth among them or not, or the courtesy or those love and affection which, as you have mentioned, those even those your father has taught 50 years ago and they used to come, and are you also getting the same type of love affection from those whom you have taught and those who have become very big in the cricket world?
yeah, again, it depends on your personal interaction with them. You see, the moment somebody feels that you're doing something just because they're paying you to do it, that warmth, that affection, that becomes completely different. It's on a different level altogether. They feel that they've hired you to do something for them and they're paying you to do it. So till the time you are actually helping them with something, they are and they're paying you in return, that relationship exists. But once that time is over, thereafter you're no one. I mean, as far as they are concerned, your part in their life has ended. So that is the difference between professionalism and amateurism. Now, if I say, when I talk about my dad's this thing, 50 years later, people who have still had the same kind of warmth for him. In our time, it's just not possible because the time itself has changed, and that the perceptions have changed, the way of thinking has changed. So if that the moment that consideration of money comes in, it completely changes the equation between a student and a teacher. So if in a particular case you have been able to help someone going out of your way to do it, he will remember it. He will have that regard for you. He will have that respect for you, or maybe for the rest of your life. But in most cases, it would not be there because he feels that he hired you for a particular job, he paid you to do it, and you did your job. That's it. The job is over. So now he no longer needs to really give you that respect or regard.
But earlier time, I still remember when we were child and when our one master, his name was, still I remember, Master Tota Ramji, used to come to our place. He and definitely my father used to pay him monthly. But he was having full authority. He used to beat us also at that time when we were small. And we have no right to say anything to even our parents, ki, why is beating when we are making payment. No, that was not the consideration at that time.
Exactly.
Payment has nothing to do. Teacher is a teacher. At that time, a doctor is a doctor, was a doctor at that time. Nowadays, in all the profession, even for the medical profession, which or the teaching profession, which was supposed to be the noble profession at one time, now people say, no, we have made your payment of your consultation fees or the surgery. Why will give you the respect? That is not there. We have paid you money, you have done your job, that's it. Similarly for the professors and the teachers. So what you are saying is, yes, that difference has come now. Okay.
Yes, so that actually is, I think, the biggest difference from that time and to the present time. That's the biggest difference in mindsets. The other difference, if I might just take a minute of yours, the other difference which I personally feel is the kind of value that people used to place on things at that time, because things were not readily available. Even when we were growing up in the 70s, 80s, even in the 90s initially, the before liberalization set in, the kind of things that were available in the Indian market were quite limited. If you were to buy a car, you either bought a Fiat or you bought an Ambassador, and there was no other third car to choose from. And similarly for everything, wherever you went, you had one or two choices, and that was it. And once you had bought it, because again salaries were quite low in those days, and before liberalization, so the amount of money which was available to you was quite limited. So when you bought something, you actually cherished it. You sometimes had to save up to buy, maybe even an expensive shirt. If you wanted to buy a shirt, you wanted to, save for a month or a month and a half and then go and buy that shirt. So obviously you would cherish that shirt and you would place a value on it, which today people don't. Today everyone has a lot of disposable income, or at least before the pandemic struck, they had that kind of disposable income, and they don't think twice about spending on things, acquiring. They have an endless list of things which they want to acquire. And the moment the difference between that time and now is that the moment they've acquired that particular thing, it sort of stops giving them the kind of pleasure which they would otherwise derive from it. With the people from an earlier time, they derived from it. So if, for example, my father bought a radio for himself, he cherished it. He listened to the commentary of cricket matches, of tennis matches. He listened to the BBC. He listened to the Indian news and everything on it. It was a big part of his life. Every day in the evenings when he sat with the radio. But today you buy one thing after the other, and it just doesn't give you any pleasure beyond the first few days. And so that's another very, very big thing, big difference that has happened from that time in mindsets of people from that time to now.
Okay. Now I think we have to change, because otherwise the youth viewers will feel that we are just bashing them. No, it's not bashing. Yes, now youth is technology wise very advanced. They have more knowledge than in our era. But yes, the difference has come. That is obvious. And it is a generation gap. I'm sure this youth of today, when they will come and become the older generation, the next generation of this youth will also have the same generation gap, which we are also feeling many times. Now, my question to you is, in your book, there are photographs, and there are few photographs in black and white. Now, please tell me who clicked those photographs and what is the relevance of those photographs with this book? Can you just explain?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, there are, photography has been one of my hobbies. So over the years, apart from writing about things, I also took a lot of photographs, and especially being in the Air Force, traveling to different places, some very out of the way places as well. It gave me a lot of opportunities to click photographs. So I put a lot of them, particularly where they were related to the text that I was writing. A lot of my memories that I've written about in this book, they are captured as photographs as well. So I thought that I would bring that photographic element as well into the book, so that the reader who was reading that could also look at the photograph and relate to what he was reading. So that is how those photographs came about in the book. As far as the black and white photographs, my father again was, as I mentioned, I sort of learnt everything from him. So he was a photographer, and he had these cameras almost all the time around his neck when we were growing up.
Kodak box camera or something like that?
He had two cameras, which I also later on used. One was an Agfa bellow camera. So there was a black bellow in front, and you could close the front like this.
Yes, yes, yes.
And so that was called a bellow camera. Now, in fact, what happened when I was growing up later on, and when I started clicking with that camera, was that there was a small pinprick, perforation in the bellow. So whenever there was a photograph which was taken with it, there would be a sort of blurring in front of the photographs, like you would get if a dog ran across the picture or something like that. So that's something which was funny actually. So that was one camera which he used, and then there was the these reflex cameras, where you had to look down into the viewfinder like that, and there was the brand name for that camera was called was Rolleiflex. Rolleiflex was an American brand actually in those days, and they actually invented the reflex camera, so it was their technology completely. So again, that was another camera that he used, and so I actually started photographing on those cameras, and you could buy these 120 films in those days, photographic films from you could buy it from Kodak, you could buy it from Orvo, you could buy it from Agfa, you could buy the Indian Hindu films as well, the Hindustan Photo Films company, and they had the 120 version of that film had 12 exposures, so you could take 12 photographs only in one film, and so that's how I learned, and that's where I took those photographs. So these black and white photographs were mainly taken by my father when he was taking photographs, and I put them in this book because, particularly because of that section which I said, of those conversations that I had with him, where he talked about a time which was prior to my time as well. So these photographs relate to those times mainly, to joint families, to huge get-togethers during pujas and weddings and that kind of thing. Now, that's another thing which we have lost over the years. That's another big difference which has happened. Earlier, most of us used to live in joint families, and especially during vacations, during pujas, during get-togethers, and weddings and all of that, the entire family from all over would come to your house, to where you lived, and all of us would get together. I remember at one point of time when 25 cousins were there in our house, and we were all together and we were playing around. It was such fun. You didn't need to make teams, of different teams at that time. If you're playing cricket, your cousins would probably make two teams or three teams out of that. So uh, so those photographs, photographs of those gatherings. There's a photograph in that book which I wanted to talk about, which talked about a particular social, uh, thing which was adhered to at those times. The ladies of the house, the brides of the house, they always wore a veil on their heads, in when in front of their elders, or in-laws, or whatever. So there's a photograph which my father had clicked, where all the brides, there were five brothers. My father's, there were five brothers. So all the five brides were sitting with my grandparents, and all of them had this veil on their heads in that photograph. So that is something which, again, at this time, probably you cannot even imagine. So
True.
that's the significance of those black and white
Yes, and
photographs.
and you have mentioned one thing about the cousins. Yes, earlier any occasion, it's even if a wedding, everyone is at your home. Nowadays, everybody is in hotel. Nobody wants to call anybody at the home, and even the family also shifts to the hotel, so that then no one will come to the. Now, my question to you is, because we are going to ask you that, I am coming to after few more questions about that. You have, I want you to, as the customer is saying, that you have to read the portions from your book. But before that, when did you realize first that you wanted to be a writer?
uh, I would say it's been a like a dormant kind of dream that I had. I went into different things. Obviously, I joined the Air Force, and it was. But this was something that was very close to my heart, as I said right from the beginning. I had been writing these small pieces. I had kept a diary, and that kind of thing. So I always thought that at some point of time, these things that I were writing, and I mean, without being very, falsely modest about the whole thing, I also knew, because some of my friends who had read these pieces which I wrote, a lot of them from different parts of the world had told me that, they really enjoyed reading these pieces. So I always knew that people would enjoy reading what I wrote and probably be able to connect to them. So I always had this feeling that at some point of time I would need these. I would want these pieces to be published, whether as a book or in a journal or in a magazine or whatever it is. And so that is where this particular dream was born. And as I mentioned, when I was writing the blog in between, when I had about 15, 20 blog articles, I tried to get it into print, and it didn't work out because most of the publishing houses, they're very wary of giving a chance to somebody who's not known. Especially when you have to publish a printed book, there are costs to that. So they want to be, most of the time, these publishing houses, they want to be sure that they can recover those costs at least and make a profit if possible on the book. So when you're talking about an unknown writer, they are not sure. They don't know how many books will be sold and how many people will actually want to read your book. So they generally don't give a chance to new writers unless somebody knows you in that setup. Somebody knows you, and he wants to give you a break or something like that. So when I tried that, I sent these write-ups to many publishing houses, many big well-known names, and almost all of them, some of them did not reply. Even some of them replied to say that, we won't be able to take this up because of XYZ reason. So I thought that this would never happen. This book getting published, these articles getting published, they would never really happen. But when the lockdown came, that actually altered a lot of things, and even the publishing industry itself went through a change, because the publishing shifted from hard copies or paperbacks to more of online publishing. So there, in online publishing, the costs related to publishing reduced quite a bit. So there was an opportunity for unknown authors also to be published during that time. And I was lucky. I have a school friend of mine. I grew up with her in that small town. And when I spoke to her about this book, about these articles that I had written, she had read a few of them. We were on a WhatsApp group together of the old, of our school, and I shared some of my write-ups on that WhatsApp group. So she had read them, and she said that, why don't you write a book? And I said, no one's going to publish it. So she said that I will publish it for you. You write, you make up at least 40, 45 articles. Let's go to at least around 200 pages, and I will publish it. So that is how this book was born. Without her, it would just not have been possible. So
So,
thanks to COVID, thanks to that classmate from 50 years ago, this book is here, and we are talking about it today.
okay, now my question to you is, you have written in this book about yourself. And when you are writing about yourself and your family, what was the reaction of your family? Because see, if you are writing something fictitious or something, nobody bothers. But when you are writing, definitely they are always curious what you are writing, whether you are mentioning them or you are portraying them in a proper way or not. Have you faced those challenges, or have you faced come across such types of things?
Not really. I was very lucky because my family was always very supportive of what I did, and they, in fact, obviously in writing this book, it's almost 73,000 words long. So 223 pages is the book. Now, obviously, I spent a lot of time writing it, and when I was writing it, obviously, I was away from everything else. I just had to sort of lock myself up in a room and sit and write. So my family was always very supportive of that. They didn't say that, why are you not participating in the family discussion, or why are you not sitting at the table with us, and this and that and all of that. Of course, I did that as well. But what I'm saying is that I took over a lot of time of theirs, which was rightfully theirs, to write this book for myself. And so they were very supportive. They obviously, they sometimes wanted to know what I was doing, what I was writing, but it was not never in a negative sense as such. And they always encouraged me to do what I was doing, and I was very lucky in that sense. And so I'm very grateful to them for that kind of support.
Okay. Now, my last question to you before we will request you to read the portions from the book. My last question to, are you planning to write more books, or this is your first and last book?
No, obviously, judging from some of the reactions that I've got from the people who have already read this book, they have been telling me that, why haven't you written about so and so thing? Why haven't you? And they've all been part of my life. They've all seen what I've been writing about. So a lot of them have been writing that, saying that, why didn't you write about this particular period? Why didn't you write about that particular incident? So I think that I can very easily go on into a second book on the same theme. There are so many things that I've not written about, so many things which are there in my mind, and I could very easily go on to a second book. And as far as writing, as I said, I mean, I just keep writing things, whether it is just stray thoughts which come into my mind, or something. So I could always put them together into a second book as well. And as you are aware, I've also been writing regularly for Outlook magazine, uh, basically on cricket. So that is something which I'm hoping to continue. And again, I'm very grateful to Outlook for having given me that opportunity, because again, it depends on unless you are somebody who's known in that field, somebody who's a known cricket writer, a national magazine will not give you the opportunity to publish an article in their magazine. So here again, I was lucky that I was given that opportunity, and that has now grown to almost 30 articles for Outlook over the last 6-7 months. So that, hopefully, that I'm hoping will continue. And So even someday, maybe even those articles can be put together into a book, and we could have a book on cricket on that. So there are a lot of plans to write in future. And this is definitely not going to be the first and last book of mine.
That is very good news, because we definitely want that you should write more and more, because your Outlook articles are really very thought-provoking, eye-opener, because what you are writing is very contemporary and people wants to read such type of frank articles from a cricket expert. Thank you very much for the first portion of our discussion. Now, uh, as customary things say, we would like, and our viewers also want to, that you should read the interesting portions of your book, whatsoever you feel from the different chapters. As you mentioned, there are 6 or 7 chapters. So if you can give those interesting, if you can read some interesting things, so that will be very, very nice for all of us, in all our viewers. So Wing Commander Ajit Ghosh, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'll start with the very first chapter, the first article. I won't call them a chapter actually. I'd rather call them articles. So I'll just start with the first article, which actually introduces the book and says what it is all about. So although we've been talking about the book and we've had a discussion on it, but I still think that if I read some portions of this article, it will probably make it even more clear to the viewers as to what the book is about. So I start by saying, welcome to Smalltown. Let me invite you to take some time off and undertake a journey down memory lane with me to a way of life that we've left behind. Uh, it has changed, as I mentioned, that way of life is no longer there. The nostalgic images in these 45 write ups will remind you of places and people from an earlier time and leave you feeling good. I grew up in a beautiful small town tucked away in the middle of nowhere. It was actually not close to any big city at all. In eastern India, it was an idyllic, close to nature childhood of a loving, close knit family in a sprawling old house which was built by my great grandfather in 1918. 5 generations of our family had lived there by the time we finally moved out to Calcutta in 1991, after my father retired from his professorial work at the local university. Our grandparents were with us in my early growing up years, and that meant lots of wonderfully enjoyable visits on the holidays from assorted cousins, uncles, aunts, all of whom were coming home to their parents, which enriched those idyllic years and gave us the most unforgettable memories. I am so grateful that those visits from our extended family happened, and they gave so much of meaning to our growing up years. And there were always lots of close friends around us and lots of fun to be had and lots of cricket to play. When I first started writing these pieces, they were originally meant to be a journal for myself. As I mentioned, it was basically a diary for myself. Vastly enjoyable trips down memory lane, remembering people and events, casting a fond look over my shoulder at a time and a way of life that has since disappeared. For there are no small towns anymore today, anywhere in the world. Thanks to mobiles, TV, internet, the world is now just one big melting pot of interconnected people cutting across nations, cultures, languages, villages, cities, and towns. That wasn't so when we were growing up, and each place, especially back of beyond Mofussil towns like us, like ours, had their own lifestyles and pastimes, their own values and ideals, their own heroes and villains, each an island by itself. So in those days, these kind of towns, these kind of places, they were like islands. They were separate. They were by themselves. They were not connected to any other place in the world. I remember, if I just digress from what I was saying, I remember there was a train which used to pass through our town coming from Delhi, and it used to go to the northeast to Guwahati. Now, on this train, there were a lot of army personnel who used to travel to the northeast, and there were a lot of people from the northeast who were traveling on that train many times. So we used to go, like, in a small town. There, you were fascinated by a lot of things. Trains was one of the things that I was fascinated by. So many times I would go to the railway station to look at the train and see, the people who were there and all of that. So for the first time in my life, I saw a Northeastern person with the kind of features that they have on that train. I had never seen in that town that we grew up in. I'd never seen a person with that kind of features. So that is how isolated these places were at that time. When we grew up, we didn't know that there were people in our country who looked different from us. So each place was an island by itself. Today it's so different because of the internet, because of interconnected cultures and places and everything. So that wasn't so when we were growing up, and each place, especially back out beyond Mofussil towns like ours, had our own lifestyles and pastimes, their own values and ideas, their own heroes and villains. Each one an island by itself. Not anymore, I think. People still wrote letters and sent telegrams in emergencies. This is again something which the present generation will not relate to. So people wrote letters and sent telegrams. So when you got a telegram at home, in those days, it used to create panic in the house. A telegram has come. It's some bad news. That kind of feeling would always be there. Trunk calls. We had something called a trunk call in those days for the youngsters who are watching this show. Trunk calls booked with the local telegraph office took an eternity to mature. So if you had booked a trunk call to a different city, say if you're trying to call Calcutta from Bhagalpur, you booked a trunk call with the telegraph office. And they would give you a token number, which could be in the morning, early morning. You booked it at 9 o'clock in the morning. By the time you actually got that call on your telephone, if you were lucky enough to have a telephone at home, by the time you got that call, it might be evening. And even then, by the time this call matured, the line would be so bad that the person at the other end would probably never be able to make out what you were trying to say. So you would keep shouting, hello, 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 hello. I don't know. I mean, these are things which people today would find very difficult to even imagine. But they're not that far off either. I mean, they're not. I mean, these times were not as ancient as they're sounding actually.
And there used to be different calls, normal calls, urgent call, lightning call, when
Yes.
you book it.
So even a lightning call might take 5 hours to come through.
Yes.
So amazingly, this is not actually as ancient as it sounds, though obviously today's generation would struggle to even imagine such things. Life was definitely a lot quieter, a lot more laid back, a lot less mechanical and gadget driven, and a lot more fun and real. In our lifetime, in these last few decades, it has been a time of great social upheaval and change, fueled by the relentless march of technology that has changed lives beyond all recognition. The life that I am talking about, the life that I live today, is I can't recognize the earlier life, and when I think about the life that I live today, so technology has brought in such change. It has brought in such social upheaval in our lives that it is almost unrecognizable. So in our lifetime, in these last few decades, there's been a time of great social upheaval and change, fueled by the relentless march of technology that has changed lives beyond recognition, and of great lateral movement from villages to towns to cities, across borders and languages and cultures. People have just moved from one part of the world to another part in our times when we were young, when we were growing up. Someone who lived in a different country was almost like somebody who lived in a different planet. And so when somebody came home from the US or the UK or something, people actually just queued up to look at him, to see how he looked, how he spoke, how he dressed, and all of that. Whereas in our time now, people just take a holiday. Just on a weekend, sometimes people take a long weekend. They travel to UK to see a match at Wimbledon or something and come back the next Monday. So these are things which have changed beyond all recognitions in our own lifetime. In these 20, 30, 40 years that I'm talking about, these changes have happened. But somewhere deep down, and a lot of people have migrated from one place to another in search of a better lifestyle, in search of more, more income, better lives, better professional opportunities. People have moved from one country to another country. People have moved from cities, from villages to towns to cities, and so that again was something which was not there earlier, because people were born in a particular place and they lived their entire lives in that place, and they passed away from there itself in most cases. Whereas in this time it has been so much of movement across borders, across cultures, across languages, countries, everything. So, but somewhere deep down, perhaps there remains in most of us a longing for what has been left behind. So all of us remember that time when we grew up, the small place that we grew up in, our childhood friends, a longing for what has been left behind, a yearning for the uncomplicated, less crowded lives that we once had. So that yearning, that is primarily what this book is all about. That nostalgia about growing up in a secluded small town in the 70s and 80s, in a different way of life, and moving out into the world that lay beyond. In most cases, it is an intensely personal narrative. As I said, these are basically, they started as diary entries. So it is basically a very personal narrative of what I was feeling, what I was thinking, what I had seen at that particular time. But one which a lot of people may perhaps recognize and identify with in terms of their own life experiences and their own and the images of their own growing up years. I had started writing these pieces to remind myself of those times, and each write up is independent and complete in itself. However, since they were written over a period of time, of a few years of time, the timeline might get a little blurred at times, especially when they're read together. But I'd like to believe that this would not be a major distraction from the central theme of nostalgia that flows through all the pieces. Um, Gradually, as a few of my friends read those write-ups, I found that they could relate to them just as much as I did, irrespective of where they lived or what they did for a living. Possibly because the basic human emotions and values are the same all over the world, anywhere in the world, for everyone. As I mentioned, the basic things, your family, their well-being, your own dreams, aspirations, your how you deal with your failures and successes. All those are intensely personal things, but they are also universal. They are the same all over the world. So those are kind of things which I've written about in this book, those kind of experiences. And some of them wrote to tell me that they loved reading these little pieces about a bygone era, which gives me the hope that they will strike a chord in the hearts of people who have grown up in close-knit families and small towns the world over, where people knew each other and had time for each other. That's one of the biggest things which has changed in modern times. People don't have time for each other nowadays. And even in a family, if you see, if you see a family, if you see a bunch of friends sitting together, everyone is actually looking into his mobile. They're not talking to each other. they're not really together, although they are together, but they're not really together. So the virtual friend is more of a friend than the physical friend who's sitting next to you, or the family member who's sitting next to you. So that's another big change that has happened over the years. Many of whom who had relocated from their roots and their childhood friends to the big cities or to different countries, and in the process had gone on to live a whole new life. But somewhere deep down, the memories remain to tug at the heartstrings every now and then. Every now and then, you would recall something from your childhood, and that would suddenly set off a train of memories, a train of thoughts. And it would be a privilege if these write ups could help unlock those memories for the readers of this book. So that's the introduction that I have, the introductory article that I have for this book, which talks about why the book was written and how it was written and why it was written. So that's the first one. Um, I think I still have got another 15 minutes. I'll quickly.
No, you have about 10 minutes.
Okay. um, okay, if I just read the first one, the first, the first article, which is in a small town long ago, part one. It says Dwarakashram, our ancestral home at Bhagalpur. The name of our house was Dwarakashram. My great great grandfather was called Dwarkanath Ghosh. So this house was named after him by his son when he built it, my great grandfather, in 1918. Dwarakashram, our ancestral home at Bhagalpur, a picturesque little town in eastern India, was a great emotional bond that bound all of us closely together in a way that would be quite impossible today. It included the extended family of uncles, aunts, and cousins who visited us during Durga Puja and the winter vacations, especially when our grandparents, Dadu and Dadi, were still with us. For them, as indeed for all of us, the house itself represented the place, the town. In the 70s, when we were growing up Bhagalpur was a charming little district town, still not big enough to be called a city. The roads were still mostly uncrowded, and there were plenty of open spaces still left, with old houses on large grounds and an unhurried, laid back way of life, where nearly everyone knew everyone else and had time for each other. On crisp, cold winter mornings, a short distance away from the house, in the overgrown wooded banks of a large marshy pond that belonged to our family, Parsis or juice collectors would be busily climbing the date palm trees, the khajur trees that grew there abundantly. They would have expertly fixed their little earthen pots the previous evening near the frond at the top of the tree to collect the deliciously sweet juice overnight. And in the mornings, they would bring back that heavenly, sweet, refreshing nectar to the house before breakfast. Memories of quiet, drowsy summer afternoons, livened up by the melodious call of Goels from the tall jackfruit tree in our backyard. Years later, I suddenly find myself wondering whether that tree from our childhood still stands and whether a later day cuckoo still calls from it on lazy summer afternoons. Every summer, the jackfruit tree would inevitably yield a healthy crop of 70-75 big, ripe jackfruits, harvested for us by Baldeva's sons, Kalu and Kisna, on a day when we kids couldn't be moved from there for anything, not even for meals, till the last one of them was down. And in the mornings, our permanent fish vendor, Gorango, would come cycling down with the fresh catch of the day from the Ganges. And in the evenings, the man from Paradise Bakery would deliver freshly baked, unsliced loaves of bread and cream rolls that smelled so heavenly that we could tell of his approach from afar. They were friends of our growing up years that we knew so well. Their visits livened up by a cheery word or a shouted greeting as they passed by on their cycles. So different from the impersonally professional home deliveries of today. With the coming of winter, Baldeva would plant vegetables in the land around the house, and we would help him to prepare the elevated square beds of earth with our spades and shovels, a skill that came in handy later in the time of preparing our cricket pitches. In the evenings, exactly at 9, Ma would ring the bell again for us from downstairs for dinner, and Didi, Dada, and I would drop whatever we were doing and run downstairs. After Dadu had passed on, Dadi would sit at a separate wooden table away from the main dining table that we would be sitting at, where no non-veg items would be allowed, and Ma would always serve her first before coming to us. Our lives ran to the discipline of unwavering routine that was so familiar and comforting and orderly at that time. Baba used to have morning college and would leave early on his bicycle every day, even before we were up. He had the rally cycle of those days with a basket and a dynamo powered front lamp, trousers neatly tucked into bicycle clips to prevent them from getting entangled in the chain. Now, my father, as I mentioned, was a university professor. And he was the head of the department. He was a reader at the university. He was a visiting professor for foreign universities who took exams. In those days, there were no TOEFL and CAT and exams for foreign students who wanted to study in England and US as a test of English. So each university, each foreign university appointed an examiner in India, in non-English speaking countries, to conduct that test for them, a special test for them. My dad was one of them, and he was the examiner for the University of Michigan. And he was also the head of the University Athletic Association. He was the president of the Athletic Association, so he oversaw the entire sporting activity at the university and in the small town that we lived in different sports disciplines. So a person of that stature, of that kind of standing, he cycled all his life from home to his place of work. And he never bought a scooter or a car or anything like that. He never felt the need to do it. Because again, so if we talk about different times, different kinds of people, different attitudes, nowadays I don't think any university professor comes to college on a cycle. But my dad did that all his life, and he was no exception. Everyone else was also doing the same thing that time. So great. I mean, that's something which has changed so much. And because of that, they were so much closer to people. They were so much, they knew people so intimately because of that closeness. His student was also cycling to college. He was also cycling to college. They were probably cycling together and talking while they were cycling. So I don't think, students today can even imagine that kind of a situation ever happening. And that is where that respect was born. That is where that regard came, and where people, even 50 years after they had ceased to be his students, they would still come to look him up and come and sit and talk to him. So those kind of things, I really cherish those things, and these are the kind of things that I've written about in this book. And this book is full of these kind of small memories that I've. In the evenings, he would sit with his students in the study, surrounded by shelves and almirahs of books that had belonged to 3 generations of our family, starting with my great-grandfather, who had also been a deputy magistrate in British times. A collection to which 2 more generations would go on to add their own books, ours and our children, in later years. Most of his students, and he had taught generations of them, took private lessons from him free of charge in that age of innocence, because like most other teachers of that time, teaching was a calling for him and not a profession. He taught because he had a passion to teach. Simple. He didn't teach for money. But the world was like that back then, and people did things because they enjoyed doing them. Even test cricketers in those days, they would get paid 100 rupees to play a test match. I don't know how many cricketers would play for 100 rupees today. But the world was like that back then, and people did things because they enjoyed doing them, not necessarily because they were being paid for it. And in that small town of ours, almost every student of his was a son or a nephew or a brother of someone known. And there was no question of asking them to pay. Not that many of them would have been able to pay without causing a serious disruption in their family's finances. And so such a thing was never mentioned at all. Instead, most of them became like extended family members to us and would come to see Baba long after their lessons had ended and long after they had stepped over the threshold of studenthood into professional lives. And even after they had drifted away to different places and different callings in life, the bond remained unchanged. To them, Baba would always be their much loved, much respected guru, or sir as they like to call him, to be looked up to forever. And they didn't need an alumni association to seek him out, even in an age of no internet or social networks. Evenings brought darkness to our small town and the inevitable power cuts. We prepared for them in advance by trimming the wicks of the kerosene lamps and lanterns that every house had back then, cleaning out the soot from the glass chimneys, fixing paper or cardboard flues or caps on them, extending the length of the chimney so that the airflow would be better and the flame would burn brighter. So you tried to make the flame burn brighter by putting a cap on top of the chimney. This was a light that we mostly studied by in our early school and early years. Later came the emergency lights, and much later came the inverters. But many a time these would not work because we never had electricity long enough to charge the batteries. And it was interesting to recall that the heat never really bothered us much then. We were too preoccupied with trying to have enough light to study by in those dark evenings to bother much about luxuries like fans. And ACs were something that most of us had never even heard of at that time. And in the case of telephones that most of us did not have at home then, or the TVs for that matter, it was perfectly fine to go to a friend's house that had one, or to watch a Sunday movie, or a cricket match, or to place a call. So you just walked into somebody's house to watch a movie on a Sunday, or place a call. So thank you very much.
I'm sure, Wing Commander, your book is so. It's even if we were reading, it has given a nostalgia to me, and I'm sure all our viewers have also gone in the memory lane. And the youth, the young generation, will come to know what has happened at that time. That is very, very important. Now, before I will leave you, I just want to know the availability of book and the cost of the book, where the book is available, and how the viewers, if they want to buy, how they can buy the book.
Right now, it is only available on as a ebook on Amazon, but hopefully we'll have a paperback soon as well. So what viewers who actually want to buy the book, want to read it, need to do is to go to the Amazon website and search out the book by the name Smalltown Nostalgia, and make an online payment of 150 rupees, like a normal Amazon purchase that most of us do nowadays. And the book gets downloaded onto your mobile or to your laptop or to your tab, or whatever you want to read it on. So it comes to your email address.
Okay,
So that's how you would read it.
I'm sure many of our viewers would like to definitely download, because nowadays that is the easiest way, instead of going for the paper book. But once the paper book will come, definitely people will buy that also. So thank you very much, and all the best wishes for your small town nostalgia. And
Thank
I'm
you.
sure that we will see more and more books from you. You are such a talented person. I have full faith that you are going to write whatsoever you're written is going to be an eye-opener, as well as inspirational and motivational to many of us who has written the diaries, who have written the blogs, but who are not having that courage, or who never thought about writing the books. They may come and write the books. Thank you very much, Wing Commander Arijit Ghosh. And today's program, which has been live telecasted by V4 News, Global TV, V4 Stream, Malnadu TV, News Gaon se Samvad Sarokar News, as well as was shown live on YouTube and Facebook. And our endeavor is to bring to you every day a new topic. And tomorrow, the topic is Media Conference with Lal Goel. The topic is 2021, the way forward. And our panelists are Dr. Rajiv Anand, Senior Secretist, Mumbai, Miss Poonam Pathak, Motivational Speaker, Mumbai, Mr. Nitin Anand, IT Professional, Irving, USA, and Miss Garima Arora Kannan, Founder Life Leadership Movement, Mumbai. So please tune in tomorrow for Media Conference with Lal Goel at 10:30 a.m. Thank you very much, and all the best to you, Wing Commander Arijit Ghosh, for giving such an insight of your small town nostalgia. Thank you very much, and thank you all the viewers. And I'm sure today, the first time the Media Conference with Lal Goel has launched an online book, which will be enlightening the experience of all our viewers. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.